The pictures may be fake.
My innocence was stripped away.
The humiliation is real.
I felt responsible and began to blame myself and was ashamed to tell my parents despite doing nothing wrong.
Generative AI is turning innocent photos into sexually explicit deepfakes.
They're unbelievably realistic.
With profound consequences for victims.
I think a lot of these cases go unreported.
This week on Open Record,
the message of this legislation is clear. Don't do it.
The fight to keep AI from stripping away your innocence.
The experience of having someone look at a sexual depiction of yourself is not a fake experience.
From the FOX6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Brian Polson, and of course I am joined here by Open Record's executive producer, Sarah Smith. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
And we are joined once again by Contact 6's Jenna Sachs. Jenna, thanks for being here.
No problem.
Especially knowing you have a busy day today, so we've got to do this and then get you on your way to a bunch of story shoots. We're recording this episode on Tuesday, June 10th. It has been nearly a month since the Wisconsin State Senate voted unanimously to crack down on the use of artificial intelligence, turning innocent photos into nude images without the consent of the person pictured. But that legislation is still waiting for action in the state assembly. It is the latest effort to protect children and adults from a new form of computer-generated sexual exploitation. We'll talk about what deep fake nudes really are, why they've become a nationwide concern, and what both federal and state lawmakers are doing about it. We'll start all of that after this break.
We are back on Open Record. We often start this podcast, if you've listened or watched, you know, we talk about how we got started on a story and just kind of the background of that. And we will get to that part. But first, what is a deep fake nude? It sounds probably as horrible as it is. What is it and why? I mean, probably know the answer, but why is it a concern?
Well, so the term deep fake doesn't just apply to nude images. It's going to really apply to anything that AI can generate that's not real, right? So that term has come to really be a descriptive of anything that involves computer generated, whether it's animation or you know, we're seeing all sorts of videos on social media now where it looks like a celebrity's talking or someone or a politician, but it's not really them. The voice sounds like them. That's a deep fake. But a deep fake nude is really what it sounds like, which is where you take an innocent photo, someone who is fully clothed, someone who never intended to be appearing nude, and then AI essentially digitally strips away the clothing, predicting what a person would look like in that photograph if they didn't have clothes on. And you say, well, how can AI do that? Well, AI has learned a lot about what human bodies look like when they don't have clothes on, and has gotten smarter and smarter and better. So these things have become incredibly real, incredibly realistic, and therefore that much more concerning to someone who never intended to have an image like that of themselves sent among friends, sent among colleagues, or somewhere out in the public domain.
So generative is just like a website that does it, or?
Well, generative it's artificial intelligence that can essentially generate things like this.
Okay.
It is a form. It's the AI that is, through learning, through all the input, can essentially create things out of thin air. Create things that don't otherwise already exist. And so, in this case, we have these images that don't exist. They're not real. It's not. We've done so many stories over the years, and we've talked about them here on Open Record, where you have an issue with someone who is capturing secret images of another person, or you have an intimate relationship where someone willingly shares a photo of themselves with an intimate partner, and then that relationship ends.
Right. And
we've heard so much about revenge porn and things like that. That person who now has the possession of it was consensual at a certain point. The person meant to take the photo or have it taken of them or the video, but now it's being spread out to other people, and that part was never intended. This is different because this is something where anyone who's never taken, you can say, look, I would never, I think we'd have those stories. We'd say the best way to protect yourself, don't ever take those kind of images. Right. Don't ever let someone take those kind of images of you.
That's the scariest part.
But now it's people who've never taken those kind of images, they've never subjected themselves to that sort of thing, are still vulnerable to having someone else do it because there's an innocent photo out there somewhere in the public domain that's been accessed and turned into this.
So the people who are making these images, and in your story, it involves young people. How are they even doing this? Is it as simple as doing a Google search and they can find how to do this easily?
I think that's really why it's so important to talk about it right now, because if you don't know about this, if you're not familiar with it, trust me, your kids know, because it is that easy to find. Now, when we did this story, we went out of our way not to show anything on the screen that included the name of one of these sites. We didn't want to give any fuel to someone who goes, yeah, that's a real concern. I want to try it. We didn't want to make it that easy, but unfortunately, it doesn't take much ingenuity to go to Google and search for this kind of thing. There are endless numbers of sites. Now, it's not clear how many of them are actually independent, disconnected sites, or if there are a lot of different names of sites that come back to the same handful of people who do this or organizations that are doing this, but it's not hard to find. And there are apps in app stores. I think the app stores are trying to do a better job of weeding these out, but we're still hearing reports of advertising on social media sites. Meta, recently, there was some reporting done that there's advertising on their sites for these, they call them nudify sites, or AI undressing sites. So it's not hard to find. And so someone who is interested in doing something like this could spend a few minutes Googling and probably find a site that would do it.
Well, and isn't it a problem too that like it's kind of like a weed where you pull one weed, but then like three more pop up in its place. And I feel like that's kind of how this is, right? Like one app maybe gets shut down or a website gets shut down and maybe two or three more pop up in its place.
I think that's really been the big issue with trying to tackle it from the end of the production side, because it's not as though it's, you know, your neighbor down the street who's running a site and then they advertise it and it's, you know, that could be shut down. But who knows where these are being hosted all over the world. And you know, you think of all the other scams, Jenna, that you cover that originate in other countries. The internet is global, right? It isn't localized. So it's hard to stop it on the sort of production end, which is why it becomes so much more important to talk about, okay, what can be done and how can you protect yourself from someone using one of these sites? I do think the app stores have done a better job, but websites are really difficult to police. We talked in the story to Marquette professor Michael Zimmer, who is the director of the, I think, what is it called? The Center for Data Ethics and Society. I think that's what it is.
Sure.
But he's a computer science professor. He knows, and he said it's like, I don't think he used the term whack-a-mole. What did he say? It was something similar to that, though. Yeah. That it's an arms race. That's the term. It's an arms race that, you know, when one is shut down, others pop up. So yeah, it's really difficult to imagine that our state, local, or even federal government is going to be able to stop these sites from existing.
And we know this is happening locally because of a search warrant that came into our newsroom, which is what drew your attention to this and kind of led to the story. Yeah,
that gets back to that. How do these stories begin, right? So a lot of times we become aware of these issues because there's something that happens in our community and someone's been victimized. And in this case, it's one that actually led to police intervention. This was in a North Shore community in Fox Point and Bayside, where a 13-year-old boy had taken photographs of two female classmates, also 13 years old. One was
he found them on social media.
He found them on social media. These are and it describes in the, so if you're not familiar with search warrants, when law enforcement wants to search a device for data or something like that, or they want to search a home or whatever, they have to sort of give justification. And it is in the affidavit in support of that request for a search warrant where we often get the nitty-gritty, the details of what happened. And in this case, that affidavit spells out that the girls had posted photos. One of them was like think of how many middle school kids are taking a selfie in the mirror, right?
170.
A selfie in the mirror.
Yeah,
in the back,
a lot.
Fully clothed, nothing inappropriate. Posts it on, I think it was Instagram. Another one, it's actually a photo at her bat mitzvah. This is a celebration, a family celebration, and it's posted online. This classmate takes those two photos, runs them through some sort of AI website program, something, creates the deep fake nudes, and then shares them with other classmates over Snapchat. And one of the classmates who received these photos is the one who I think then went to, whether it was to his parents, to the principal, to, I don't recall exactly how it ultimately got in the hands of law enforcement, but once the victim's parents found out, law enforcement ends up involved. And now that is, we don't know all of the details because that case is proceeding through juvenile court, much of which is not, doesn't occur out in public view. but it's being taken seriously. The question is that the only time this has happened? And I would say absolutely not. It's happening, I think, probably quite frequently, but often it's not being reported.
Well, and I think to your point of, we might not know that this is happening. I mean, clearly we do now, but like, I have kids that are around this age. And so I always like to think, oh, I'm ahead of it. I know what they're doing. I know what they're looking at. I know what's out there. They'll have phrases that they use. And I'm like, where'd you hear that? And it's like the trendy phrases or whatever they're saying. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there is a lot I don't know. And that's terrifying.
I thought it was really interesting in this story that there was a survey done by an organization called Thorn, and we had an expert from Thorn who we interviewed for the story. They did a survey of 1,200 young people ages 13 to 20. I think the survey was done last year, so there's always a lag in some of that data. But what they found was of the 1,200 youths I feel like I'm in my cousin Vinny now all of a sudden. But of the young people who were surveyed, of the ones who had heard of deepfake nudes, 85% or more immediately recognized they're wrong, they're a problem, they're dangerous or potentially harmful. And yet, it was really alarming to hear how many already knew someone who had been the subject or target of a deepfake nude. I think it was 1 in 8 said they knew someone. 1 in 17 said they themselves had already been targeted with a deepfake nude that they did not consent to. And you go, well, 1 in 17, that's a small percentage. Until you stop and think, that's a classroom. Every classroom, there's a kid in there who's already been targeted by this. The numbers, if you really extrapolate that out, are astronomical. So that one case we hear of that ends up in front of law enforcement is actually the great exception to the rule if this survey is really true as you spread it out over the population.
Do you know about any other cases of this happening in southeast Wisconsin?
We know that there was one other search warrant in Washington County. We haven't gotten much more information on it. I believe it was in Hartford where something similar had happened. And I think in that case, it might have involved an adult victim. And that's trickier because, and we'll talk about that, but the law in Wisconsin has taken steps to cover children, to at least make it equally felonious. I hate using that term, but make it a felony to possess child pornography that is computer generated. So that image of the 13-year-old girls that was turned into nude images, I mean, that's child pornography in Wisconsin because the state legislature has already made that determination. And I think 38 states, at least at last check, had already done at least that much. But a lot of those 38 states have also passed protections for adults. And Wisconsin has yet to do that. There's work going in that direction. We did find another case that is going through, I think it was a 21-year-old, 22-year-old who had images of child pornography, but then also had some digitally produced child pornography that was charged as well. So we have seen that new statute used. But again, these are really kind of the tip of the iceberg. They're few and far between. I think we're going to hear a lot more of this coming out in the coming months and years for sure.
But then does that law and cover all of it, right? Like, I mean, from the stuff from like, so are deep fakes treated in the same way as child porn? Like, how does that all fit in? In terms of the, if you have a nude image of a child in Wisconsin, whether it is digitally produced or it is a fake, it is treated the same under the law. So far as I know. Now there may be some slight differences, but I believe that is treated the same. Obviously, if there is a real victim of sexual abuse who is the subject of those photos, then that could be stepped up to other charges. But oftentimes child pornography are images that are being traded all around the internet. And so whether it is digitally produced or it is of an actual human child, I think it is treated the same way under the law. But again, it's different for adults. And that is something that I think maybe it's a good time to take a break. We'll talk about that. Lawmakers in Madison are trying to do something about that, and they're trying to enhance the penalties that for when children are involved. And we'll talk about that right after this break.
We are back on Open Record. It is certainly troubling to have someone create a nude image of you just by using AI. But the question I guess we're all facing right now is is it legal? Because this is kind of uncharted territory.
Well, and when we talked to Assistant District Attorney Erin Karshan, she handles sensitive crimes in Milwaukee County. And what she said is, I mean, they have a legal theory, even as of today, that if you're doing this without someone's consent, they can sort of try to massage or find a way to make an argument that it's illegal, that it's criminal. But it's difficult because the statute isn't written in a way that explicitly says that digitally produced images constitute an intimate depiction or something like that, as the law already prohibits sort of non-consensual intimate images. So it's difficult. It would be much easier if they had an explicit law that said these computer-generated images are in fact illegal under certain circumstances, or under what circumstances would that be? Now, I can tell you that there is a new federal law. The Take It Down Act was just signed into law recently by President Trump. It was a big effort by First Lady Melania Trump to get this passed. And in our story, we profiled a teenager from Aledo, Texas, that's the Dallas area, I believe, who was kind of the face of the bill. She was the inspiration for the bill. Elliston Berry was 14 years old when a classmate did this to her, shared it with the whole school. She actually said in an interview, they have a school of like 2,400 students. And so far as she's been told, they all saw it.
Oh, wow.
And she was someone who was obviously was horrified by this, said that she took it personally. She felt humiliated, ashamed, felt embarrassed. She did nothing wrong,
right?
But she went through all of this. Now, it happens to be she's extremely smart, extremely well-spoken, and she was really motivated to speak out and do something about this. She and her family got in touch with Congressman or Senator Ted Cruz, and Ted Cruz ended up pushing this legislation. That does now make it a federal law, that it is a federal crime to have these kinds of non-consensual intimate deepfakes. But it did one thing that's even more important than that, potentially, and that is a mechanism for doing something about it. If that image is posted to social media and you notify Meta or you notify Snapchat or somebody else or Instagram, they have 48 hours to take it down. Once they've been notified, this is not consensual, I did not consent to this being out there, 48 hours to take it down. So that's happened at the federal level. But here in Wisconsin, the AI produced images of adults, still not clear that that is illegal, that is a felony, or that is a crime. And this new legislation would address that.
My initial reaction to that is a lot of damage can be done in 48 hours. You know,
absolutely.
Sometimes something is gone from the internet. We've moved on, but within that time frame, the news cycle shorter than 48 hours. I think the point there is just
to put some pressure on the social media sites that they have a responsibility. They can't throw up their hands and go, hey, what do we do? We have no control. Now there's some pressure on them to do something about it.
And does it matter if the image is realistic or if it's kind of cartoonish? I mean, does that matter at all?
I don't know under the federal law that matters. Under state law, there is the one that is currently working its way through the legislature. There have been some amendments, and I'll say that this is one of those you look at and go, who in the legislature is going to oppose a bill like this? Well, there has been some discussion because what's the argument against criminalizing something like this? Well, some will say, and we talked to Professor Zimmer, who said, well, wait a minute, what about free speech? If I'm doing something on my own computer and I'm making artwork on my computer, sometimes artwork is controversial and that sort of thing. Why can't I do that? The difference here is, first of all, are these images of an identifiable person? It's one thing to create art of someone who doesn't exist. It's another thing to create these images of someone who is identifiable. Now, what if that's, say, someone who's trying to make some sort of commentary on President Donald Trump? That's where the free speech arguments start to come in. Why can't I make this thing? It's satire. It's artwork. There was also State Representative Darren Madison who raised the question, what about kids? I mean, a lot of kids, to them, this is it's funny. It's a joke. They don't realize how serious it is. And so are we going to funnel a bunch of young people into the criminal justice system and make them felons or make them, juvenile delinquents when all they were doing was just passing around a joke at school? That was, one of the questions he asked. He actually also asked, what about if it's being used for educational purposes? I didn't really get that one. Because I don't know what educational purpose there would be for creating a deep fake nude without someone's consent of an identifiable person.
Of a person that's
And I did reach out to his office to ask, can you explain what scenarios you're talking about that would be educational? I got no response.
Interesting.
So I don't know what he was talking about there. But the response he got from others on the committee was, this was in a public hearing. They said, look, this isn't a joke. This has gone beyond being a joke anymore because there is real harm that's done. And we're going to talk a little bit to someone who knows all about that, an expert who knows the kind of harm that can be done to children with these things. But when it was ultimately voted on, it passed the state Senate 33-0 unanimously with a couple of amendments. And those amendments kind of narrow down the scope of what this applies to. One, they said it has to be created with the intent, posted, published, or shared with the intent to harass, intimidate, or otherwise embarrass or coerce a person. So if it's just shared because it was a joke and it was fun, and I'm not sure how that's going to play out in the law if you can't prove intent. So that does raise the difficulty level for prosecutors. One other thing they added to that legislation was it has to be realistic enough that a reasonable person would think it was a real image. So a satirical, and obviously satirical, artistic looking nude wouldn't count under this particular legislation, or at least with that amendment that was passed. I think what they're trying to do is trying to get around some of the First Amendment issues that they expect to encounter and that maybe have been encountered in other states. But in doing so, there's some concern by some supporters that maybe they've watered this down so much that they're leaving some gaps here that people could get around the law.
I think one thing that we do when we do stories is we try to think, okay, if this was a regular person, how would we go about doing this? Maybe we're showing a short trip from A to B, and so we're going to drive it ourselves as part of the story. This is one of those things where in talking with you, Brian, and getting the story, it was, okay, how can we show how this works?
Yeah, how do we demonstrate this without creating further harm?
Right. And we didn't want to use, obviously, anyone at the station, anyone that we know, like, again, identifiable. We're not going to do that. So can you kind of walk people through what we ended up landing on and how that
yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't have the courage, I don't know if courage is the right word, of the New Zealand lawmaker, I don't know if you saw, who actually held up a deep fake nude of herself in New Zealand Parliament to make the point.
Oh, thank you.
I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to ask anyone here at Fox 6 to do that.
Right.
So what we said is, what if we used an inanimate object, a mannequin? So we found a realistic looking mannequin, which, by the way, was its own whole adventure, going to find the person who was selling mannequins on Facebook Marketplace and had a whole room full of many scantily clad. It was a bizarre
Where is this person?
Kidding.
It was. I could go down a rabbit hole.
I'll just say it was in rural Walworth County. That's what I'm going to say. But that person, I explained what we were doing, and I said, here's the purpose of the story. So we came and we got a photograph of a fully clothed mannequin with a face that looked generally human, ran this through one of these sites. And we didn't, by the way, many of these sites want you to sign up. They want you to pay money. But they have you can maybe do one of these for free just to kind of see how it works. So we did the free thing. And it was remarkable how realistic the resulting image was, even though it wasn't a human. And we couldn't show that completely on the news, but with black bars censoring sensitive areas, you're able to see what the image looked like in the beginning and what it looks like in the end. You get the point. And it took seconds.
I was just going to say, this wasn't like, expertise. This wasn't hit submit and, well, we'll wait 48 hours. This was like...
Yeah, I sadly don't know much about AI or using AI. I mean, I'll throw a query in now and again, but I'm not a generative AI expert. I did this in seconds. What I will say, though, as a warning to anyone who thinks, I'm going to go try it, there was these websites, I don't know who's running them. You don't know if you can trust them.
Yeah.
They did have the sort of sign up to pay. I was curious how that process worked. And as I got deeper into it, a lot of them wanted cryptocurrency, or they wanted you to send money to some sort of third party with a really long looking and questionable code. And it really felt just going down that path, like you are setting yourself up to have all of your money stolen or something really bad. It just seemed super shady. So I thought, boy, I'm glad that's not something I want to do. I would be concerned if I had a teenager or a child who was doing that themselves, that they could be getting themselves in a lot of trouble.
Definitely.
But anyway, that we see the realistic image from a mannequin. Imagine what you could do with obviously a real person. And that's a real concern. And as we said, this has been really seen as an especially big concern for kids.
Right.
Because kids know this technology, they're aware of it, they use it, and we know that they might have that propensity to say, oh, this will be funny, or this will be a joke, or this will be a great way to get back at my ex who broke up with me and went out with that person, or whatever it might be. Wisconsin is trying to protect both children and adults, but we know it's been a particular concern in the area of sexual exploitation of children. We're going to take a break, and after that, we're going to be joined by Jen Newman with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, for whom generative AI has become a really big issue. We'll talk to Jen right after this. We are back on Open Record. We want to welcome Jen Newman to the podcast. She is Executive Director of the Exploited Children Division of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Jen, thank you for being here on Open Record.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
So let me start with that. I didn't know there was an Exploited Children Division, an entire division devoted to that. By the way, NECMEC is the sort of short term National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Tell me about the division that you are in charge of and what you guys do.
Sure. So, NECMEC started back in 1984. We unfortunately were a result of tragedy when John and Reve Walsh's son, Adam Walsh, he was about 8 years old back in 1981. And unfortunately, he was kidnapped and murdered. And in that week, between the time that he went missing and unfortunately his body was recovered, John and Reve really realized there was no response, really infrastructure within law enforcement to respond to a missing child. So a lot of the legwork they had to do themselves, making posters, doing distribution, trying to get Adam's face out there. After the sad result of obviously, him being deceased, they just realized they just did not want other families to go through what they went through. So in 1984, President Ronald Reagan signed the National Center into existence, basically. So last year we celebrated our 40th anniversary. And for the most part, when we first started, it was really focused on the missing side. The internet hadn't been invented yet. So this kind of incredible way to connect hadn't really kind of taken off until about the mid-90s. So that is really when the exploited side of the house of the National Center kind of came to be. So in 1998, we launched what's called the Cyber Tip Line. And this is the U.S. reporting mechanism for suspected child exploitation. So members from the public can make reports to us, as well as the electronic service providers who are actually mandated to make reports to us. If they operate in the United States, they are obligated to make reports to the Cyber Tip Line on child sexual abuse material, otherwise known as child pornography. We call it child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, online enticement, and child sex trafficking. So last year, we had about 20.5 million cyber tip line reports that came into us. The vast majority are from the electronic service providers. So the Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, all of those. And because we almost serve in this global perspective, many of those reports, about 90% of those, resolve internationally. So we do a lot of work with international law enforcement and a lot of international NGOs and partner agencies to make sure that those cyber tip line reports carry on and those cases don't stop just because they cross country borders or time zones or language barriers.
I think if we go way, way back before all of that, I mean, we've come a long way since the milk cartons. And I think back when child pornography, way back in the day, it was done primarily through the mail. People were trading physical photographs through the mail. So postal inspectors were really big in dealing with child pornography. Obviously, the technology has changed dramatically. And now we're completely on the other end of the spectrum into this whole new world of generative AI. How has that impacted and changed what you are dealing with in terms of the exploitation of children?
Yeah, well, first to touch on what you mentioned, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service was our first federal law enforcement agency partner in this fight. So you're exactly right with that, because in the early 80s, child sexual abuse material was magazines that were coming from abroad or around the world. And I got to tell you, Brian, those are still in circulation. The unfortunate thing about child sexual abuse material is it doesn't time out. So an offender's never going to look at an image and say, this looks dated or this looks too old. Those pictures from those magazines have been scanned and digitized, and we still see them in circulation. We still see them in collections. So really good point there. I think what we're seeing now with generative AI is something you touched on a little bit earlier. One thing we've always really talked about is trying to distinguish non-consensual production from non-consensual distribution, right? And so when you think of non-consensual production, that is going to be really an offender on child situation. There's an offender who's harming that child, or a child who's being enticed or groomed or sextorted to make that imagery. There's some threat over that child. But what we're seeing now, especially in this age of sexting and sharing nudes, which I'm glad you talked to Thorn, they're a great partner of ours, love Thorn, love the study that they just put out, is that we're seeing that sexting and sharing nudes is more normative. I'm not going to justify that it's normal, and I'm not saying we should endorse it, but it is normative behavior for kids these days. And so it's very easy now for that imagery that is consensually produced, it is then non-consensually distributed, right? So a child might say, yes, I did take a picture of my breasts and I sent it to my boyfriend as a form of flirting. I just didn't expect him to put it on Reddit. So yes, the production was consensual, but the distribution was not. And so now with generative AI, to the point you were making earlier, children don't even have to engage at all and they can be victimized. So to your point about the bat mitzvah picture, now you have kids who just have a digital footprint, right? They're not even sexting. They're not even sharing nudes. They just have pictures up from a family reunion 3 years ago on social media. And the picture of the child eating a hot dog all of a sudden now gets morphed into a child in some sort of sexual position. And the challenge with the technology right now is it's really good. I mean, we've had this kind of technology for 20 years. I mean, if you think back to kind of the precursor of Adobe Photoshop. But again, it was really hard to get it as realistic. You still might see the head a little wider than the shoulders or something like that. That would be kind of a giveaway that it was an artificial image.
Well, you've got to know how to use Photoshop too, which is at least there's a technological barrier. A skill
100%. And now what we're seeing is you just put this in there and it does it all for you and it looks really real. And that harm is serious and very significant to those victims because they know they can't follow that image around and say, that wasn't me, I didn't do that. It looks like they did.
What do you say to someone who says, it's not real? What's the big deal? It was just meant to be a joke. I have to imagine that's a pretty common response you get, especially from young people who have distributed these images.
Yeah, that's really, the way that we're trying to figure out how to fight this, because at the end of the day, what can you do? I mean, you're being victimized by something that you did not even play a role in, which even if you did, we would never victim blame. But again, these are kids who just have done nothing at all. And so, I think we are trying to get to schools and talk to them about culture there. And to your point, really change it from being something that's funny, or, just something that makes someone more popular, that they can do this or that they did this to someone, and almost attack this in an anti-bullying approach and say, hey, if you're the person who's doing this, you're a jerk. No one thinks it's funny, and really start trying to tampen down that kind of peer response to it, of the snickering and the laughing and the sending it on and on and on and all of that, and really just try to change the perception of it. And then to Brian's point, I mean, we're getting some legislation, at least on the federal level, and I know in some of the states, that are now saying, hey, kids, it's not funny at all, and now it's illegal. So really trying to bring that home to them as well.
So,
no, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, so, okay, changing the perception and how maybe victims, kids or whatever react to it. What about from the parent side? I'm listening to all this as a parent of a tween, and it's like terrifying for me. Even now, like not even just, when they turn 13, it's not like this magic thing that happens, but even now. So how do you, what kind of communication is there for parents, or how can we either try to get ahead of it or communicate to the kids in a way that like to your point, it's not funny and it's not a joke?
It's a great question. Really where we've landed is coming up with a plan with your kid the same way you would like running a fire drill in your house. Have a plan with them, because it does two things. One, it shows your child that you are a safe place to go if something happens. One thing we find a lot, and we read about in our cyber tip line reports when kids make them to us, is they clearly don't have an adult that they can go to who they're not worried is going to respond with anger or fear or some sort of reaction or emotion from the parent or the caregiver. And so we also have to just prepare adults to receive this information and be calm and put aside personal feelings for later and just say, kiddo, I'm in this with you. Thank you for coming to me. Let's do something about it. So coming up with a plan with your child shows, hey, I'm going to receive this well. If you come to me about this, we already talked about it. We know this could happen. We have a plan. The other thing too is it makes it a little less scary for the child because they go, okay, we have a plan. You know, again, going back to the fire drill scenario, your child may be less worried about a fire because I go out the hall, I take a left, I'm going to go down the stairs. I know how to get out of the house if there's a fire. Same thing for these kids when it comes to this. Say, here's what you're going to do. You're going to come to me. We're going to sit down. We have some great resources at NECMEC. We have, while it's named the same, but unrelated, we have a service called Take It Down. And that's where kids can go. It's anonymous and they can submit the hash value, which is like a digital fingerprint of intimate imagery that may be posted online. You don't even have to know that it is. It is submitted to us. The image is not sent, just that digital fingerprint. And that is made available to our social media partners for that content to come down. I think you mentioned something earlier about adults too, with kind of that revenge porn. We have a sister product as well that's run by some UK partners of ours, and it's called Stop NCII, so Stop Non-Consensual Intimate Imagery, and that is for 18 and plus. So really good two avenues there for any non-consensually distributed images. Generative AI or not, you can use Take It Down. So I think really making sure that you have some resources at the ready, you know what to do. We have other ways that we can assist with content takedown at NECMEC. And again, that just makes your child feel prepared. If this does happen, I have a parent I can go to, and we have a plan to tackle this together.
I want to ask one other thing, and that is beyond these nudifying images, how is generative AI being used to manipulate or put children at risk?
Yeah, we're seeing a bunch of different ways. So we have kind of what we call our text-based offenses. So that is going to be really the power of words, right? So we see offenders, creating completely artificial imagery, but they put text prompts into the Gen AI platform, basically describing the picture they want to see. I want to see a 12-year-old girl doing X, Y, and Z. I want her to look this way. And really iterating and fine-tuning that image over and over to eventually create CSAM. Now, there are some companies that have some guardrails up where you can't put a certain string of words together, but these offenders are pretty creative and they can get around that. So, perhaps instead of saying genitalia or something more specific, they would say, show me the child eating a flesh-colored banana, right? Or something like that, which can then start getting an image more to what they're looking for. We also see offenders using generative AI to either add additional sexual abuse to already existing CSAM. So perhaps it's an existing picture of CSAM. I just want to add more to it. I want the abuse to be more than it is, so they can do that. And finally, what we're also seeing is that they can maybe tweak that existing imagery. So say, for example, if I'm a preferential offender of boys, but I have a CSAM image of a girl, I can change the genitalia so it's more in line with, my taste or my preferences, and kind of doctor it so that it's exactly what I want. So there's unfortunately many ways. This technology that, again, is super cool and makes our life easy and fast and all of these things. Unfortunately, as it's always been the case with technology and child sexual exploitation, no matter how well intended the technology is meant to be, these offenders find a way to use it on their behalf.
It sounds to me like the best defense right now is knowledge, is understanding that this is out there and knowing that when you see it, it's not okay.
I think that's exactly right. And communication is key. And I think that that's why media is like a podcast like this is such a great opening starter to have that conversation with your child. That's why I love seeing these kinds of stories run on the news in the morning when everyone's sitting and having breakfast, because that's a great opener, right? Like, hey, has that ever gone on at your school? Do you know anyone who's had that happen? Instead of trying to have that very awkward, just bring it up out of the blue, the media coverage can be really nice prompts to start those conversations in the family or with the child in a kind of more organic way. But you're exactly right. Knowledge and communication are key. And I think some of it is also one thing we also talk about and want to talk to kids about is stop the cycle. Just because you receive the picture does not mean you need to send it on. And really start trying to make sure that it's not just what we call not just a bystander, but an upstander, and say, hey, I'm not going to pass this on. I realize I got it. I don't think it's funny, and I'm not going to keep sending it along.
I am taking that chunk and I'm going to play that. That's like, I could not nod my head anymore.
You were nodding
it was
pretty-
like going to roll off my neck, but like you are 100% correct.
I just wanted to say, Jen Newman, thank you so much for being here. This is incredible information and great for us to be able to provide to our viewers, the parents, and even our co-host sitting right here. So
taking notes.
So thank you again for being here on Open Record.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, we'll take a break and we will go off the record right after this. And it is time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question that Jenna and I have not prepared for.
Oh.
You have it on some pink sticky notes today. What do you have, Sarah?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, I will say that one of our colleagues has been messaging me with his gym has like a little like would you rather board, so when they walk in you can tally as you walk in. And so this will start out the larger question. So this question is, would you rather always have to sing when you talk or dance when you walk?
Sing when I talk.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
thing. Okay.
I think so too.
Okay.
Because
I just feel like, what if I'm tired and I don't want to dance?
yeah, and if you're in a really rotten mood and you're like, I have to, although singing probably, but you could be quiet.
But you could be,
Because you
or
don't
like
have
angry about it. Like, did you get your script in?
If I don't want to sing, I could just be quiet.
Right. You just don't have to talk. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So that all being said, what Brian and I were talking about this because I think at some point we'll need to go do karaoke.
Yeah, FOX6 karaoke is going to happen.
Now, Jenna, your
We don't wanna
answer
talk
can't
about the
just
last
be
time
I
that
don't
happened, by the
sing.
way.
Okay, just so you know.
Well, okay.
Okay. So what would be your top 1-2 top karaoke songs? If you had to, and this was you had to,
And
and
which
there were
Disney
no choices.
movie would it come from?
I know. Well,
And why is it
I
the
always
Moana
think of Ben
soundtrack?
Handelman, who we work with. His go-to song is "The Circle of Life" from The Lion King.
It's a real crowd pleaser.
I mean, I'd probably pick something fun. Like the songs we're singing in the car with my kids right now are really fun. Like Wrecking Ball's really fun. I'm just thinking about something upbeat and I'd have to think about it. I could get some really nerdy songs in there too. Like I went through a serious Indigo Girls phase, and I could sing you any of those songs with like a lot of heart, depending on the crowd.
I love it.
Do you have like a for sure go-to, Sarah?
Yes. So when I sing it in the car or it comes on in the radio, I'm like, oh yeah, I know I do like the song. It's sorry. It's Bonnie Raitt. Like that's something to talk about. Give them something to talk about.
Let's give them something. We're probably,
like those
we're gonna have
songs,
to pay
though.
royalties if we keep doing that,
totally.
so.
I know.
That
Only
kind of
9
reminds me
seconds.
of like those songs like "Islands in the Street."
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like those kinds of songs are just fun.
Right.
I feel like there's certain songs that are, you talked about crowd pleasers. So I like to sing. I do like karaoke.
Yeah.
I was just out Friday night at a
You
karaoke
did.
bar
Oh,
with some
God.
friends.
Right.
And the thing is, there are songs that I would like to sing for me. Like
Yes.
I've got,
Yes.
80s hair band, heavy metal,
Right.
maybe Metallica. I don't know that the crowd wants to hear that, so I won't.
Right.
And
Yes.
you know what the crowd doesn't want to hear? They don't want to all of a sudden see everyone who's waiting in line to sing doesn't want to know you're singing Stairway to Heaven.
Oh my gosh.
Or
Yes.
American Pie
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yes.
But
Freebird.
when I was in college, and I haven't done this for a long time, but when I was in college, it was Bohemian Rhapsody. And I'm
Yes.
telling you, it would bring down the house.
Yes.
Because everyone wants to sing
everyone wants
along.
to sing it. And you get a little bit of self-serving, like you get to sing in the beginning of like, oh, you really croon, and it's just, and then all of a sudden it's that piano,
everyone's
and then everyone's losing their minds.
I feel like if you go to a karaoke or if you sing, you should be singing something that other people want to sing along with,
right?
Knowing that they're going to be your backup singers,
right? Yeah. Sometimes people will sing the thing that's special to them, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But you can tell you've lost the crowd.
No one wants
to goes into their conversation. And they're not listening anymore because they can't participate. I think karaoke is a participation event.
No one wants to hear you sing "Brick" by Ben Folds.
As long as the room's not taking it too seriously, though, because sometimes I get like social anxiety watching people who think they're really good, but they're not.
Oh yeah,
and
that's true.
That's painful, and then I don't really enjoy being a part of it.
Yeah,
that
so
is
I like the people that are bad and know it.
Yes,
that's how,
kind of
or like they're selling it with the energy.
Yeah,
that's part of.
You also know that I am not a spring chicken anymore, and I used to be able to hit notes I can't hit. So now there are certain
and you
songs.
don't know until you try to hit it.
Yep. And I had a couple. I was like, okay, that was a bad choice this time.
Yeah.
So anyway, we are out of time. So I'm not going to tell you what those songs were. We'll take a break and wrap things up when we come right back. Let's just say, as we come back, that I can't sing Sebastian Bach anymore. I can't hit Skid Row. I used to be able to. Nope, not anymore.
Nope.
You don't want to hear that.
All right.
If you have a topic you would like us to discuss on Open Record or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. As always, thank you to the people who make this podcast possible. Sarah Smith, Jenna Sachs, Tim Primo back there behind the other side of the screen, and our chief photographer, Kale Zimney. Dave Machuda, who's off this week, doesn't have any part of it, but always does every other time.
Usually.
Have a good time, Dave. All right, with that, I'm Brian Polson. We'll be back next week.